Hi everyone! Tonight we're diving into a curious and rather eerie chapter of history. How people in the 1600s pretended to be possessed, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of desperation, and sometimes to escape a fate they didn't choose. Before we begin today's video, I could really use your help. We've noticed the channel's reach has dipped slightly, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's completely free, it takes just a moment, and it helps us keep bringing you new stories every week. Thank you so much. Now let's get started. If you enjoy these stories, do give the video a like and subscribe. It truly helps the channel. And please comment where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's always wonderful to see how far our audience stretches across the world. Now then, dim the lights, maybe switch on a gentle fan, and join me for this late night journey into the past. I write this now because my hands still shake when I hold the basin for another man's blood, because I wake in darkness and hear the sound of breathing that is not my own, because I am old enough to know that silence is not innocence, and that what we witnessed in those years, what I witnessed, has never truly left me. They say memory fades with age. Mine has only grown sharper, more insistent, like a splinter working its way to the surface after decades beneath the skin. I was 28 years old when it began. I am 63 now, and I have never spoken of it to anyone who might believe me. But I am no longer young enough to care whether I am believed. This is what happened in the winter of 1649, in a village so small that maps did not mark it, where the river ran grey and the church bells rang across fields that had known plague and war and hunger in equal measure. This is what I saw. This is what I did. This is what I failed to prevent, and if you read this and judge me well, I have already judged myself. The village of Ashford-under-Lyme was neither beautiful nor wretched. It simply existed, as such places do, clinging to the edge of England like a barnacle to a ship's hull. 43 houses, a church with a crooked spire, a mill that ground flour from wheat that never grew quite as it should. The soil was heavy clay, the kind that clung to boots and made walking an act of determination. In summer, the air smelled of growing things and animal dung. In winter, it smelled of smoke and damp wool and the particular sourness of too many bodies pressed into too few rooms. I had come there 3 years before, after my studies in Cambridge, and a brief, unhappy period in London, where I learned that wealthy men do not like physicians who tell them uncomfortable truths. The parish of St. Oswald needed someone who could set bones and birth children and, when necessary, offer an opinion on whether the Lord had taken someone through natural means or through something darker. I needed somewhere quiet, where my hands might be useful and my thoughts my own. The rector, Father William Ashcombe, was a lean man of 50 years, with a face like weathered stone and eyes that saw more than he spoke of. He had fought in the wars, though for which side he never said, and he carried himself with the careful dignity of a man who has learned to be neither too Catholic nor too Protestant, but simply necessary. We took our meals together sometimes in the draughty rectory, and spoke of Greek philosophy and the management of tithes and whether the new translation of Scripture had been an improvement or a falling away from truth. It was Father Ashcombe who first told me about Anne Birch. She was 17 years old, the daughter of Thomas Birch, who owned the mill and 3 fields besides, and who had arranged for her to marry Edmund Corley, the widow's son from the next village. A good match, people said. Edmund was steady, owned land, had 2 strong arms and most of his teeth. Anne should have been grateful, but Anne Birch did not want to marry Edmund Corley. I did not know this immediately. I knew only that in the first week of December, as snow began to settle in the corners of the churchyard, Father Ashcombe came to my house, a narrow building that leaned slightly to the left, as though weary, and asked if I would examine a young woman who had fallen into fits. What manner of fits? I asked, already reaching for my case, the leather worn smooth by years of use. The sort that make her mother weep and her father curse, he said quietly, the sort that require both a physician and a priest. I understood then, or thought I did. We walked through streets where snow had not yet been trampled into mud, past houses with doors shut tight against the cold. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin grey lines. Somewhere a dog barked, and the sound carried strangely in the muffled air. The Birch house was larger than most, 2 stories with good thatch and windows of real glass, clouded with age but whole. Thomas Birch had prospered, in his modest way, and he was not a man who let anyone forget it. He met us at the door. He was broad-shouldered and ruddy-faced, with the thick hands of a man who has worked with grain and stone all his life. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from weeping or rage I could not tell. "She's upstairs," he said, and his voice was hoarse. "She's been this way since yesterday morning. Won't eat, won't speak sense, just lies there and—" He stopped, swallowed. "Just come and see." The stairs creaked beneath our weight. The house smelled of bread and tallow, and something else. Something sharp and organic, like sweat mixed with fear. At the top of the stairs was a narrow corridor and a door standing half open, and from within came the sound of laboured breathing and a woman's low, rhythmic praying. Anne Birch lay on a bed too small for her height, her body twisted in a shape that should have been painful. Her mother knelt beside her, hands clasped, lips moving silently. The girl's face was pale, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. Her eyes were open but showed only the whites, and her limbs jerked in small, irregular spasms, as though invisible strings pulled at her joints. I had seen fits before. I had seen epilepsy and fever madness, and the strange convulsions that sometimes took women after childbirth. I'd seen men shake themselves nearly to pieces, after drinking bad water or breathing in certain vapours. This looked like those things. It looked enough like those things that a less careful man might have nodded, and prescribed rest and herbal draughts, and gone home to his supper. But I was trained to watch, and as I stood there in the doorway with Father Ashcombe's breath warm against my shoulder, and Thomas Birch wringing his hands behind us, I saw Anne Birch's fingers curl very deliberately against the mattress, pressing down as though to stop herself from floating away. I saw her jaw clench, not in convulsion but in concentration, and I saw her eyes, those white rolled-back eyes, flicker just once toward the door, toward us, before rolling back again. It was the smallest thing, the briefest flash of awareness, but I saw it. "Leave us," I said quietly. "The mother may stay, but the rest, please, wait below." Thomas Birch opened his mouth to protest, but Father Ashcombe touched his arm. They left, footsteps heavy on the stairs, and the door clicked shut behind them. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. The mother, Margaret her name was, looked up at me with eyes that had cried themselves dry. "Can you help her?" she whispered. I did not answer. I set my case on the small table by the window and opened it. Inside were the instruments of my trade: lancet and probe, vials of tincture and powder, strips of linen, a small mirror, a notebook with pages soft from use. I took out the mirror, first polished metal, no larger than my palm, and held it close to Anne's mouth. Her breath misted the surface in small, steady clouds. Not the ragged gasping of a fit. Steady. Controlled. I touched her wrist. Her pulse was rapid but strong, not the fluttering weakness I would expect from someone in genuine distress. Her skin was warm, not fever-hot. I lifted her eyelid gently, and the pupil contracted in the candlelight, quick and responsive. All the signs of a healthy young woman lying very still. I straightened and looked at Margaret. "How long has she been like this?" "Since yesterday morning." She woke screaming that something was inside her, that she could feel it moving in her chest, that it spoke to her in a voice like broken glass. Margaret's voice shook. She said it told her terrible things, blasphemous things. And then she fell down and became this. Has she spoken since? Only in tongues, only in words I don't know. "May I hear?" Margaret leaned close to her daughter and murmured something, a mother's plea. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Anne's body went rigid, her back arching off the bed, and from her throat came a sound that was not quite a voice and not quite a scream. It was a jumble of syllables, harsh and guttural, with a rhythm that sounded almost like Latin, but was not Latin. It sounded like someone who had heard Latin spoken in church and was now trying to reproduce it from memory, getting the music right, but not the words. It sounded, in other words, like performance, but it was a good performance. When it ended, Anne went limp again, breathing hard, and Margaret crossed herself. and wept. I bent close to the girl's ear, so close that only she could hear me. I spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I know you can hear me." Her breathing hitched, just for a moment, just enough. "I know you are awake." Nothing, but I saw the tendons in her neck go taut. "If you wish to speak to me alone," I said, still in that low private voice, "I will send your mother away, but you must stop this. You must stop now, before it goes too far." I waited, counted my own heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. And then, so quietly that I almost missed it, Anne Birch whispered, "I cannot." Her eyes stayed closed, her body stayed limp, but those two words were clear and human, and full of something that might have been desperation or might have been calculation. I straightened and turned to Margaret. "I need to examine her more thoroughly. It would be better if you waited outside. But, please, I will call you if there's any change." She looked at her daughter, at me, and then nodded and left, her skirts rustling against the doorframe. The door closed. The room fell into a silence broken only by the sound of breath and the faint whistle of wind through the gap in the window frame. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. After a moment, Anne opened her eyes. They were brown, large, and full of an intelligence that was unsettling in its clarity. "You are not having fits," I said. "No." "You are not possessed." "No." "Then why?" She looked at me for a long time, as though deciding whether I could be trusted. Then she said, in a voice so level it might have been discussing the weather, "Because on Saturday I am to be married to Edmund Corley, and I would rather die than let him touch me." I had expected lies. I had expected pleading or defiance or fear. I had not expected this cold, plain statement of fact. "So you pretended to be taken by a spirit." "I did not pretend. I prayed for it." She sat up slowly, carefully, as though her body still ached from its earlier contortions. "I prayed every night for a week that something, anything, would come and take me, and when nothing came, I decided to become what I had prayed for. If the shadow believed to dwell within can delay a marriage, then let me wear its mask. And if they call for an exorcism, then I will be exorcised. And if they decide you are a witch," her face did not change, "then I will burn, and I will still not have married him." I should have been shocked, I should have been horrified, but I was not. I was only tired, and sad, and aware of how small the world had become for this young woman, that her only escape was to pretend to be the very thing that might destroy her. "Why do you not simply refuse?" I asked. She laughed, a short bitter sound. "You are a man. You have choices." "Not as many as you think." "Enough." She looked at me, and her eyes were hard. "If I refuse, my father will beat me until I agree. If I run, he will find me and drag me back. If I say I do not love Edmund, they will tell me that love is for fools and that marriage is a duty. But if I am claimed by something unseen, if I foam and writhe and speak in languages that are not my own, then perhaps the wedding will be postponed. Perhaps Edmund will decide he wants a wife who does not frighten him. Perhaps I will have time to think of another way. And what if you cannot stop? What if they do not believe you can be cured? Then I will have to be very convincing when I am healed." She was clever, I realized, dangerously clever, and she had thought this through with the kind of cold precision that most men reserve for matters of money or war. "I could tell them the truth," I said. "You could. And they would ask you how you know, and you would say that I confessed, and I would deny it, and I would have another fit, a worse one, and this time I would bite my tongue so that what left its mark upon the earth would stain the sheets, and they would believe me, and not you." She tilted her head. "You are a good physician, Dr. Greaves. I've heard people speak of you. You are fair, and you are careful, and you do not bleed patients for sport. But you are also poor, and you are alone, and if my father wanted you gone from this village, you would be gone." She was right. I knew she was right. "So, you want me to lie for you?" "I want you to say what you always say, that the body is strange, that women are prone to certain afflictions, that time and prayer may restore her." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "I do not ask you to lie, only to be vague." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the world was white and grey and cold. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Someone was leading a horse down the street, its hooves muffled in snow. Everything looked ordinary. Everything looked safe. "If I do this," I said slowly, "and it comes out, if anyone discovers what you have done, they will not only come for you, they will come for me. Then do not let them discover it." I turned back to her. She was sitting upright now, her hair falling around her shoulders, her hands folded in her lap. She looked very young and very old at the same time. "Why did you tell me?" I asked. "You could have simply continued, and I might never have known for certain." "Because I saw you watching," she said. "I saw the way you looked at my hands, and I knew that if you wanted to expose me, you could. So I'm giving you a choice." She paused. "The same choice I do not have." I stood there for a long time, listening to my own thoughts circle like crows above a battlefield. I thought of all the reasons I should walk away. I thought of duty and law and the oaths I had sworn. I thought of what it meant to be complicit, and I thought of Anne Birch's face when she said she would rather burn than marry. "If I help you," I said at last, "you will do exactly as I say. You will not let it go too far. You will not put yourself in danger, and when the time is right, you will recover. Slowly, carefully. Do you understand?" "Yes. And you will tell no one that we have spoken." "I swear it." I took a breath, let it out slowly. "Then lie down, close your eyes, and when I call your mother back, you will be as you were." She lay back down, arranged her limbs into that same twisted position, and closed her eyes. Her face went slack, peaceful, as though she were merely sleeping. I watched her for a moment, this girl who had chosen madness over marriage, and I wondered what I had just agreed to. Then I opened the door and called Margaret back inside. It is strange how quickly a lie can take root in fertile soil. Within a day, the whole village knew that Anne Birch had been taken by something unseen. They knew it because Margaret Birch, for all her grief, was also a woman who could not keep a secret if her life depended on it, and by evening the story had spread from house to house like fire through dry grass. They said she spoke in tongues. They said her body bent in ways that should have broken her. They said she knew things she could not possibly know, the sins of her neighbours, the secrets of the dead, the hour of her own ending if she was not purged of the shadow believed to dwell within. Most of this was exaggeration, the inevitable embroidery that happens when fear meets gossip. But some of it was true. Anne was very good at what she did. I visited her twice more that first week. Each time I brought my case and my notebook and my professional manner, and each time I examined her in front of her mother, and sometimes her father, and each time I said the same careful, non-committal things. The affliction is severe, but not uncommon in young women of her age and temperament. The balance of humours is disturbed. Rest, prayer, and certain herbal remedies may bring improvement, but these matters take time. It was not a lie exactly. It was simply not the whole truth, and each time, when I was alone with Anne for even a moment, when her mother went to fetch water, or her father stepped out to speak with Father Ashcombe, I would lean close and whisper instructions. Less foam at the mouth, it looks excessive. Do not speak in tongues unless someone specifically demands it. When you convulse, let your left side be weaker than your right. It is more convincing. She listened. She learned. She became, in a perverse way, my student. But I was not the only one watching her. On the fourth day, Father Ashcombe came to my house just after dawn, when the sky was the colour of old pewter and frost still clung to the window glass. He did not knock. He simply opened the door and stood there, a dark shape against the grey light, and said, "We need to speak." I was still in my nightshirt, my hair uncombed, my mind foggy with sleep, but I knew from his voice that this was not a conversation I could postpone. "Come in," I said. He entered, closing the door behind him, and stood in the centre of my small front room with his hands clasped behind his back. He did not sit. He did not remove his cloak. He simply looked at me with those pale, searching eyes and said, "The girl is lying." My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. I kept my face still. "What makes you say that?" "I have seen possession before, Martin. I've seen what it does to a person, the way it empties them out, the way it leaves them broken even after the spirit has fled. Anne Birch is not broken. She is angry. Anger and affliction can coexist. Not like this. He moved to the window, looked out at the empty street. I watched her yesterday during prayer. Her mother was weeping, her father was pleading with God for mercy, and Anne was watching them, not with fear, not with confusion, with calculation, as though she were deciding what to do next. I said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. "You have examined her more closely than I," Father Ashcombe continued, still looking out at the cold morning. "What is your professional opinion, as a physician, not as a friend?" "My opinion is that young women are subject to fits and strange humours more often than young men, and that the causes are not always clear. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have." He turned then, and his gaze was sharp. "You are protecting her." "I am being cautious." "Why?" I could have lied. I could have deflected. But Father Ashcombe had fought in wars and buried children and heard confessions that would have broken lesser men. He would know a lie when he heard one. "Because I think she is afraid," I said carefully. "And I think fear makes people do things they would not otherwise do. And I think if we are too hasty in our judgments, we may do more harm than good." He studied me for a long moment. Then he sighed, and the sound was full of a weariness that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "Edmund Corley arrived last night," he said. "He wants to know if the wedding can still go forward. Thomas Birch wants to know if his daughter is marked by something darker than illness. And the village is beginning to ask questions I cannot answer." He paused. "I need to know, Martin. Is she possessed, or is she performing?" I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to lay it all out, the way she had lain herself bare to me, and let him decide what to do. But I could not, because if I spoke, Anne would pay for my honesty, and I would pay for my betrayal, and nothing good would come of it. "I do not know," I said, and it was not entirely a lie, because in truth I was beginning to wonder if there was a difference, if belief and performance were not simply two names for the same thing. Father Ashcombe watched me a moment longer. Then he nodded slowly, as though I had confirmed something he already suspected. "Very well," he said, "but know this. If she is performing, it will end badly. For her, and for anyone who helped her. The Church does not look kindly on those who mock the sacred." "I know. And if she is truly possessed, it will end badly as well, because we will have to call for someone who knows how to drive such things out, and those men are not gentle." "I know that too." He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. "You are a good man, Martin. Better than many. But goodness is not always enough." He opened the door, and cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of snow and smoke. "Pray that God is kinder to her than we are likely to be." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the silence and the knowledge that I had just lost any chance of remaining neutral. The days that followed had a strange, suspended quality, as though the whole village were holding its breath. Anne continued her performances, for that was what they were, though no one called them such. She would lie still for hours, then suddenly jerk upright and speak in that jumbled half-Latin, her voice deeper than her own, her eyes showing only white. She would refuse food, then devour it when no one was watching. She would weep and plead and curse, and through it all she kept her gaze on the world around her, watching, waiting, adjusting her performance like an actor who had learned her role too well. Edmund Corley visited once. He stood in the doorway of her room, a tall man with a heavy jaw and hands like spades, and he watched her thrash and moan for perhaps 5 minutes before turning away, his face grey. "I'll not marry a woman who's been touched by such things," he said to Thomas Birch, and there was genuine fear in his voice. "If she recovers, maybe, but not while she's like this." Thomas Birch pleaded. He offered to lower the dowry. He promised that Anne would be herself again soon, that this was merely a passing affliction, that she was a good girl who would make a good wife. But Edmund shook his head and left, and the wedding was postponed indefinitely. Anne, when I told her this in private, smiled. "1 month," she said, "that's all I need. 1 month and I'll find a way out. A way out where? I asked. Anywhere. London, maybe. Or to the coast, where I can take a ship. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had never tried to disappear, never learned how quickly a lone woman can be found and dragged back. But I did not tell her that. I let her keep her hope, fragile as it was. But hope, I have learned, is not enough to hold back the tide. On the 10th day, a man arrived from the diocese. His name was Father Benedict Moore, and he was an exorcist. Part the third, the exorcist, Father. Benedict Moore was not what I expected. I had imagined someone old and severe with the burned-out eyes of a man who had seen too much. Instead, he was perhaps 40 years of age, with a round, pleasant face and the soft hands of someone who spent more time with books than with people. He wore black robes that had been carefully mended, and he carried with him a leather satchel that clinked with the sound of glass and metal. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, when the sky was low and grey and promising more snow. Father Ashcombe brought him directly to my house, and the three of us sat in my front room, me, the two priests, and drank weak ale while Father Moore explained his purpose. "I am not here to judge," he said, his voice mild and reasonable. "I am here to observe. Bishop Thorold received a letter from Father Ashcombe describing the case, and he thought it best that someone with experience in these matters should examine the young woman." "Experience," I said carefully. "How much experience?" 7 cases in the last 3 years. 3 were genuine possessions. 3 were illnesses of the mind or body that resembled possession. 1 was... He hesitated, choosing his words. An act of will by a young woman who believed that claiming to be possessed would bring her closer to God. And what happened to her? She was sent to a convent where she could dedicate herself to prayer without the distractions of ordinary life. He said it gently, but I heard the truth beneath it. She had been locked away. And the ones who were genuinely possessed? I asked. What became of them? 2 were successfully exorcised. The third... He took a sip of ale. The spirit was too strong, or the body was too weak. They ceased their time before the ritual could be completed. The room fell silent. Outside I could hear the distant sound of someone chopping wood, the steady rhythm of axe against log. "I will need to observe her," Father Moore continued, "to speak with her, to test her responses, to determine the nature of what afflicts her. I will also need to speak with you, Dr. Greaves, and hear your professional assessment. And then, if necessary, I will perform the rite of exorcism. With your permission, Father Ashcombe, and with the consent of her family." Father Ashcombe nodded. "You have my permission, and Thomas Birch will give his consent. He wants his daughter cured, whatever that requires." Father Moore turned to me. "And you, Doctor? Will you assist me?" I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him that I could not, that my oath as a physician prevented me from participating in rituals that might harm the patient, that I had no business meddling in matters of the spirit, but I knew that if I refused, I would lose what little influence I had. I would become irrelevant, and Anne would face whatever came next alone. "I will assist," I said, "as far as my conscience allows." "That is all any of us can do," Father Moore said gently, and I thought, not for the first time, that the Church sends its most dangerous men wrapped in kindness. We went to the Birch house that evening, the 3 of us walking through streets where candles already burned in windows and smoke rose pale against the darkening sky. Thomas Birch met us at the door, his face haggard, his clothes rumpled. He had not been sleeping, I could tell. None of them had. "She's been quiet today," he said, as he led us up the narrow stairs. "Quiet enough that Margaret thought she might be improving. But then this afternoon she started talking again. And the things she said," he shook his head. No daughter of mine should know such words. Anne's room was lit by 3 candles, their flames guttering in the draught from the poorly sealed window. Margaret sat beside the bed, her hands moving over rosary beads, her lips forming silent prayers. Anne lay on her back, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She looked smaller than I remembered, as though the last 10 days had worn her down to something fragile. Father Moore approached the bed slowly, almost deferentially, and knelt beside it. He opened his satchel and removed a small glass vial, a crucifix of dark wood and a leather-bound book with pages edged in gold. The smell of incense rose from the satchel, sweet and cloying. "Anne," he said softly. "Anne Birch, can you hear me?" For a moment, nothing. Then her eyes opened, not slowly, but all at once, like shutters thrown wide, and they were wrong. Rolled back so far that only the whites showed, threaded with tiny red veins. "I hear you, priest," she said, and her voice was not her own. It was deeper, rougher, with an edge like broken slate. "I hear you whispering in the dark, thinking your words have power. They do not." Margaret gasped and crossed herself. Thomas took a step back. Father Ashcombe's face was unreadable, but I saw his hand move to the crucifix around his neck. Father Moore, to his credit, did not flinch. "What are you?" he asked, his voice still calm, still gentle. "What do you call yourself?" Anne's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "I have many names. Legion, some have called me. Shadow, the voice that whispers in the gap between sleep and waking. I am old, priest. Older than your books. Older than your God." It was a good answer. Theatrical, but not too specific. Vague enough to sound authentically otherworldly. I wondered where she had learned it, from overheard sermons perhaps, or from stories told by firelight. She was improvising, I realized, and she was very, very good at it, but Father Moore was better. "If you are so old and so powerful," he said, "then you will know Latin, the tongue of the Church, the tongue of Scripture. Speak to me in Latin, and I will believe you." For the first time, Anne hesitated. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I saw the girl behind the mask, uncertain, afraid. She knew a little Latin from church, as we all did, but not enough for a conversation. "I will not speak your dead language," she said, and her voice was defiant now, angry. "It has no power over me." "Then speak another tongue. Any tongue you did not know before you were claimed by this presence. Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, anything." Another hesitation, longer this time, and then, from her throat came a string of sounds, harsh, guttural, full of consonants, that seemed to catch in her teeth. It sounded foreign. It sounded convincing. It was also complete nonsense. I knew this because I had studied languages at Cambridge, and while my Hebrew was poor and my Greek poorer, I could recognize the structure of a real language when I heard it. What came from Anne's mouth had no structure. It was noise shaped to sound like meaning, the linguistic equivalent of her half-Latin. But to most people in that room, people who had never left this village, who had never heard anything but English and the Latin of the Mass, it sounded real. It sounded like proof. Margaret wept. Thomas swore under his breath and crossed himself. Father Ashcombe closed his eyes and began to pray silently. Only Father Moore seemed unmoved. He listened to the string of false words, nodded once, and then reached into his satchel and pulled out the vial. It was small, no larger than my thumb, and filled with clear liquid. "This is water," he said, "blessed by Bishop Thorold himself, and carried from the cathedral at Canterbury. If you are truly what you claim to be, you will fear it." He uncorked the vial and leaned forward, and Anne's body went rigid. Her back arched, her hands clawed at the sheets, and from her mouth came a sound like tearing fabric, a scream that was somehow too high and too low at the same time. Father Moore sprinkled 3 drops on her forehead. The screaming stopped. Anne went limp. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the guttering of candles and Margaret's quiet sobs. Then Anne sat up slowly, her eyes still white, and looked directly at Father Moore. "You think your water burns me?" she said, and now her voice was almost conversational, almost amused. "It is only water, priest. Your words do not make it holy. Your faith does not give it power. You are playing with rituals you do not understand, and one day they will devour you." It was a good line, a very good line. I almost believed her myself, but I also saw her hand move to her forehead, where the drops had fallen, and wipe them away with a quick, furtive gesture, as though they itched, as though they were simply water, and nothing more. Father Moore saw it too. I know he did, because his eyes followed the movement of her hand, and something changed in his face. Not anger, not triumph, just a kind of sad recognition. "I will return tomorrow," he said quietly. and we will continue. But for now, she needs rest. We all do." He stood, gathered his things, and left the room. Father Ashcombe followed. I stayed a moment longer, ostensibly to check Anne's pulse, but really to lean close and whisper, "You are being too clever. He knows." Her eyes closed, her breathing slowed, and just before I left, she whispered back, "Then I will have to be even cleverer." I walked home through streets that were dark and empty, where snow had begun to fall again, soft and silent. I thought about Anne's performance, about Father Moore's careful tests, about the way belief and doubt circled each other like dancers who could not quite find the rhythm, and I thought about what would happen when the dance finally ended. Part the fourth. The breaking Father Moore returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each time, he brought new tests, new questions, new ways of probing at the edges of Anne's performance. He would ask her to recite prayers backwards. He would show her holy relics and watch for her reaction. He would speak in Latin and wait to see if she understood more than she should. He would touch her with the crucifix and note whether she flinched or remained still. Anne adapted to each test. She learned what was expected and delivered it with increasing confidence. When he showed her the relics, she hissed and turned away. When he spoke Latin, she responded with her invented tongues. When he touched her with the crucifix, she screamed as though burned, though I saw no marks upon her skin. But with each visit, Father Moore's face grew more thoughtful, more troubled. He took notes in his leather book, writing in a small, precise hand. He asked me medical questions about the nature of fits and humours and feminine complaints. He interviewed Margaret and Thomas separately, asking about Anne's childhood, her temperament, her piety before this affliction began. And slowly, methodically, he was building a case. On the 7th day of his presence in Ashford-under-Lyme, he asked to speak with me alone. We walked to the church, where the afternoon light filtered through windows of plain glass and fell in pale squares across the stone floor. The church was empty except for us, and our voices echoed strangely in the cold air. "I do not believe she is possessed," Father Moore said without preamble. I said nothing, waited. "But I also do not believe she is ill, not in the way you have suggested. Her symptoms are too precise, too theatrical. She performs them for an audience." He turned to look at me. "What I cannot determine is whether she believes in the performance herself or whether she knows it is false." "Does it matter?" I asked. "Yes, it matters very much." He walked to the altar, ran his hand along the worn wood. "If she believes herself possessed, if she has convinced herself that something unseen has claimed her, then she is not culpable. She is a victim of her own mind, and she can be helped through prayer and time. But if she knows it is false, if she is deliberately deceiving us, then she is guilty of blasphemy, of mocking the sacred, and the penalty for that is severe. What would you have me say?" "I would have you tell me the truth, as a physician, as a man of science. Is she ill, or is she lying?" I stood in that cold church with the weight of 7 days pressing down on me, and I made a choice that I have regretted every day since. "I believe," I said slowly, "that she is suffering from an affliction of the mind that makes it difficult for her to distinguish between reality and imagination. I believe that she believes she is possessed, even if she is not, and I believe that harsh treatment would only deepen her distress." It was not quite a lie. It was not quite the truth. It was the kind of careful ambiguity that physicians learn to use when they do not want to be held responsible for what comes next. Father Moore studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Very well. Then I will proceed with the exorcism, not as a punishment, but as a cure. If there is truly nothing inside her, the ritual will do no harm. And if there is something, even if it is only the shadow of her own fear, then perhaps we can cast it out." "When?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Tomorrow, at dawn. The hour when darkness breaks and light returns. The hour when spirits have least power." He paused. "I will need you there, Dr. Greaves, to monitor her body to ensure the ritual does not go too far. Will you come?" What could I say? If I refused, I would only draw more suspicion, If I agreed, I would be complicit in whatever happened next, but at least if I was there I might be able to protect her in whatever small ways I could. "I will come," I said. That night, I went to see Anne one last time. Her parents were asleep, exhausted by weeks of vigil. I climbed the stairs quietly and slipped into her room, closing the door behind me. She was awake. She sat by the window looking out at the snow-covered street, her face pale in the moonlight. She did not turn when I entered. "They are going to exorcise me tomorrow," she said. "I know. Will it hurt?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her it would be gentle, that Father Moore was a kind man who would do no harm. But she deserved the truth. "Yes," I said, "it will hurt. Exorcisms are not gentle. They are meant to drive out spirits through suffering, through exhaustion, through the breaking of the will. You will be bound. You will be subjected to prayers and holy water, and possibly worse. And you will need to endure it all without breaking character, because if you do, if you admit the deception, they will punish you far more severely than any exorcism could." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Will you be there?" "Yes." "Will you help me?" "As much as I can. But Anne..." I moved closer so I could see her face. "There is still time to stop this. You could admit that you were afraid, that you pretended because you saw no other way. They might be merciful. Father Ashcombe is a good man, and even Father Moore is not cruel. If you confess now, before the ritual..." "No." Her voice was flat, final. "I have come too far. If I confess now, everything I have endured will have been for nothing. Edmund will still expect to marry me. My father will still force me. Nothing will have changed, except that I will have humiliated myself and my family." She turned to look at me, and her eyes were hard. "I chose this path. I will walk it to the end. Even if the end is worse than what you feared, even then..." I wanted to argue. I wanted to shake her, to make her understand the danger she was in. But I saw in her face the same desperate determination I had seen in soldiers who refused to retreat even as the battle turned against them. She had made herself believe that this was her only choice, and belief, once rooted, is almost impossible to uproot. "Then tomorrow," I said quietly, "you must be perfect. You must give them nothing, no moment of doubt, no slip of the mask. And when it is over, you must recover slowly, naturally, as though the spirit has truly left you. Do you understand?" "I understand. And if it becomes too much, if you feel yourself breaking..." "I will not break." I left her there, sitting by the window, and walked home through streets that were silent as a held breath. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed and listened to the wind and the creaking of the house and thought about all the ways this could end badly. Dawn came too soon. Part the 5th. The ritual. They held the exorcism in the church, not in Anne's home. Father Moore said it was important that the ritual take place in consecrated ground, where the power of God was strongest. Thomas Birch carried his daughter through the snow-covered streets wrapped in a blanket, her body limp and unresisting. Margaret followed behind, weeping into her hands. Half the village came to watch, standing in the back of the church with their faces pale and their eyes wide. I'd seen exorcisms before, but only in books, described in careful Latin by men who were long dead. I'd never witnessed one. I'd never understood what it truly meant to try to drive out something unseen. They bound Anne to a chair in the centre of the church, her wrists and ankles tied with rope, her body held upright by strips of cloth around her chest and waist. She did not resist. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful, as though she were merely sleeping. Father Moore stood before her in his black robes, the leather book open in his hands. Father Ashcombe stood to one side, holding a censer that sent up thin streams of smoke that smelled of frankincense and something sharper, something medicinal. I stood to the other side, my case at my feet, ready to intervene if her body showed signs of genuine distress. The ritual began with prayer, long, sonorous Latin that rolled through the church like distant thunder. Father Moore's voice was strong and clear, and it filled the space until there was no room for anything else. The villagers in the back murmured their responses, their voices a low counterpoint to his. Anne remained still. breathing slowly, waiting. Then Father Moore began the exorcism proper. He called out to the spirit he believed dwelt within her, commanding it to reveal itself, to speak its name, to acknowledge the authority of God and the Church. His voice rose, became more forceful, and the words came faster, harder, like blows. Anne's eyes opened, white, rolled back, just as they had been before, and from her throat came that voice, deeper, rougher, full of mockery. "Your God has no authority here, priest. This flesh is mine. I will not leave it." Father Moore sprinkled holy water across her face. Anne screamed, a sound that echoed off the stone walls and made several of the watchers gasp and cross themselves. Her body convulsed against the ropes, muscles straining, tendons standing out on her neck like cords. It looked real. It looked so real that for a moment I almost doubted what I knew. But I saw her fingers, hidden from everyone else's view, pressing hard against the wood of the chair. I saw the way she controlled her breathing between screams, quick, shallow gasps that were perfectly timed. I saw the performance, and I saw something else. I saw that she was afraid. The ritual continued for hours. Father Moore did not tire, did not falter. He spoke the words of exorcism with relentless precision, each phrase a hammer blow against the thing he believed was inside her. He pressed the crucifix to her forehead, her chest, her hands. He made her drink blessed wine mixed with holy water. He commanded the spirit to leave in the name of every saint, every angel, every holy power he could invoke. Anne resisted with equal relentlessness. She screamed and cursed and spoke in tongues. She twisted against her bonds until the ropes left marks on her wrists. She told Father Moore that he would perish in flames, that his faith was hollow, that his God had abandoned him. And slowly, I watched her strength begin to fail. It happened gradually. The screams became weaker, the convulsions less violent. Her voice began to crack and fray. The performance was wearing her down, and she could not maintain it much longer. I stepped forward. Father Moore. Her pulse is racing, her breathing is laboured. If this continues, her body may fail. He did not even look at me. The spirit fights for its hold on her. We are close. We must not stop now. If you do not stop, you may kill her. Then we will have driven the shadow from her. Either way, she will be free. I looked at Father Ashcombe. He met my gaze, and I saw doubt there, and pity, but no willingness to intervene. He believed, or he wanted to believe, and that was enough to keep him silent. Anne's head fell forward. Her body sagged against the ropes. For a moment I thought she had lost consciousness. Then she raised her head slowly, and her eyes were no longer white. They were brown and clear and full of something that might have been defeat or might have been calculation. "Please," she whispered, and her voice was her own again, small, broken. "Please, it hurts. Make it stop." Father Moore knelt before her. The spirit weakens. "One more prayer, child. One more, and you will be free." He began the final prayer, the great exorcism, the words that are supposed to compel any spirit to flee. His voice filled the church, echoing off stone and wood, and the villagers joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of Latin they barely understood, and Anne Birch began to weep. Not the theatrical sobbing of her performances, real tears running down her face in silent streams. Her shoulders shook, her breath came in small, hitching gasps, and I realized that somewhere in the hours of ritual, the line between performance and reality had blurred. She was no longer pretending to suffer. She was suffering. I could not watch any more. I stepped forward and put my hand on Father Moore's shoulder. "Enough! Stop this. She is only a girl." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were not unkind. "She is a girl who has been claimed by something that does not belong in this world. Would you have me leave it inside her? There is nothing inside her but fear and desperation. Then she has nothing to fear from this ritual." He turned back to Anne and spoke the final words of the exorcism, his voice like iron, like stone. And Anne Birch let out one last cry, high and thin and utterly human, and went limp in the chair. Silence fell. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Father Moore reached forward and touched Anne's forehead gently. "It is done. The spirit has fled. She is free." Anne's eyes opened. She looked around as though seeing the church for the first time. She looked at her father, at her mother, at the crowd of watching faces, and then she looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something that made my chest tighten. She saw what I had done and what I had failed to do. They untied her and carried her home, and the villagers dispersed, murmuring among themselves about miracles and the power of faith. Father Moore packed his things and prepared to leave, his duty complete. Father Ashcombe thanked him and promised to write to the bishop with news of the successful exorcism. I walked home alone, through streets that were bright with morning sun, and I felt nothing but emptiness. Part the 6th, the aftermath. Anne recovered slowly as I had instructed. She remained weak for several days, speaking little, eating sparingly, staying in her room with the curtains drawn. Margaret tended to her with the devotion of a mother who had nearly lost a child. Thomas spoke of giving thanks to God, of hosting a celebration when Anne was strong enough. Edmund Corley returned. He came to the Birch House on the 10th day after the exorcism, his hat in his hands, his face cautious. He asked to see Anne, and Margaret brought her down to the front room, where she sat in a chair by the fire and stared at the flames. She looked different, thinner, paler, but also quieter, more composed, as though something in her had settled. Edmund asked if she was well. She said she was. He asked if she remembered anything from when she was claimed by something unseen. She said she remembered only darkness and voices and pain. He asked if she still wanted to marry him. There was a long silence. Anne looked at him, then at her parents, then back at the fire. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will marry you." Edmund smiled with relief. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder and spoke of arranging a new date for the wedding, perhaps in the spring when Anne would be fully recovered. Margaret wept with joy, and I, watching from the doorway where they had asked me to stand as witness to Anne's recovery, saw the look on Anne's face. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was resignation. She had fought and suffered and nearly broken herself, and in the end, nothing had changed. Later, when everyone else had left and Anne was alone again by the fire, I went to her. I knelt beside her chair and spoke quietly so no one else could hear. "You do not have to do this." She did not look at me. "Yes, I do. There are other ways. We could find you a position somewhere, as a servant or a companion. You could—" "I am tired, Dr. Greaves." Her voice was flat, empty. "I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of being clever." She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were full of something I could not name. "You were right. It was all for nothing. I convinced them I was possessed, and they exorcised me, and now I am back where I started. Except now I am weaker, and more afraid, and less certain of anything." "Anne!" "You should have let me burn," she said softly. "It would have been kinder." She stood and walked away, back to her room, back to the small space where she would spend the rest of her time before becoming someone's wife. I did not follow. There was nothing left to say. The wedding took place on the 1st day of May, when the fields were green and the air smelled of growing things. Anne wore a dress of pale blue, and her hair was woven with flowers, and she looked beautiful in the way that things look beautiful when they have given up. Edmund took her hand and spoke his vows, and she spoke hers in a voice that was steady and clear and completely devoid of feeling. I attended the ceremony because it was expected. I stood in the back of the church and watched a girl become a wife, and I thought about all the ways I had failed her. After the wedding, Father Moore sent a letter to Father Ashcombe, thanking him for his hospitality and noting that the exorcism had been successful. The bishop sent a letter of commendation. The village spoke of the miracle for months, how God had reached down and saved Thomas Birch's daughter from the shadow believed to dwell within. No one mentioned that Anne rarely smiled anymore. No one mentioned the way she sometimes stopped in the middle of a task and stared at nothing, as though listening to a voice only she could hear. No one mentioned that Edmund complained, quietly to his friends, that his wife was dutiful but cold, present but absent, there but not there. And no one knew that sometimes, late at night, Anne would wake screaming from dreams she could not remember, and Edmund would hold her until the screaming stopped, and in the morning neither of them would speak of it. Part the 7th. The truth that cannot be spoken. 5 years passed. I grew older, more tired, more certain that the world was not as simple as I had once believed. I tended to the sick and the dying, set bones and delivered babies, and tried not to think too much about the nature of truth and deception. Anne Corley, as she was now called, had 3 children in those 5 years. 2 lived. She was a good mother, by all accounts, patient and careful and attentive. She was a dutiful wife, managing Edmund's household with quiet efficiency. She attended church every Sunday, and spoke when spoken to and never caused trouble. But sometimes, when I saw her in the village, I caught her watching me with eyes that held a question I could not answer. In the spring of 1654 there was another case, another young woman, this one from a neighbouring parish, who fell into fits and spoke in tongues and claimed to be claimed by something unseen. The story spread quickly, as such stories do, and people began to whisper that perhaps there was something in the air, something in the water, something that made young women vulnerable to these afflictions. Father Ashcombe asked me to examine her. I went, carrying my case and my professional manner, and I saw immediately what she was doing. The same twisted limbs, the same theatrical voice, the same careful performance. She was younger than Anne had been, only 15, and not as skilled at deception, but she was desperate enough to try. I spoke with her parents, with the local priest, and I said the same careful, non-committal things I had said before. The affliction is not uncommon. The causes are unclear. Time and prayer may help. But this time, I did something I had not done before. I asked to speak with the girl alone. And when we were alone, I told her the truth. "I know what you're doing," I said quietly, "and I know why. But I must tell you, this path does not lead where you think it does. You will suffer, and in the end, you may still end up exactly where you started, except more broken." She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Did you tell them? Will you tell them?" "No, but I need you to understand what you are risking." "I already know," she whispered. "I know it might not work. I know they might hurt me. But I also know that if I marry the man my father has chosen, I will die slowly, piece by piece, until there is nothing left of me but a shape that breathes. At least this way, I am doing something. At least this way, I am fighting." And I realized, standing in that small room with this desperate child, that nothing had changed. The world was still a place where women had so few choices that madness seemed like freedom, and I was still a man caught between truth and mercy, never quite able to choose one over the other. "If you are going to do this," I said finally, "then do it carefully. Do not let them see you calculating. Do not let them catch you in contradictions. And when it is over, if you survive, recover slowly and naturally, as though you truly were claimed by something unseen, and are only now finding your way back." She nodded, and I saw in her face an echo of Anne, 5 years younger, 5 years more hopeful. I never learned what became of her. I left that parish and did not return. But sometimes I wonder if she succeeded where Anne failed, or if she too ended up married to the man she had tried to escape, marked by scars no one else could see. Part the 8th. The letter. In the winter of 1660, I received a letter. It was carried by a messenger who came to my door on a grey afternoon when snow was beginning to fall. The letter was sealed with wax, and the handwriting was careful and precise. I opened it and read, "Dr. Greaves, I am writing to inform you that Edmund Corley, my husband, passed away 3 days ago. He fell from his horse and struck his head upon a stone, and though he breathed for 2 days after, he did not wake. The physician said his time ceased peacefully. I am now a widow with 2 living children. My father-in-law has said I may remain in this house, as is customary, and manage the property until my eldest son is of age. I thought you would want to know. I thought you would understand what it means. I will not marry again. No one can compel me now. I was never possessed, Dr. Greaves. You knew that. I knew that. But I think, in the end, something did take hold of me. Not a demon, but something else. The belief that I had no choices, the certainty that I was trapped. The performance became so real that I forgot I was performing. I do not know if what I did was wrong. I do not know if you were wrong to help me, or if Father Moore was wrong to try to save me. I only know that I am still here, and I am free, and I paid a price I did not know I was agreeing to. Thank you, and I am sorry. Anne Corley. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the box where I kept important documents. Records of births and deaths, testimonies of miraculous recoveries, notes on cases that had puzzled me. I never wrote back. There was nothing to say that had not already been said. But sometimes, even now, I take out that letter and read it again, and I think about the nature of possession. Not the kind that priests exercise, but the kind that lives in all of us. The beliefs we cannot escape, the roles we are forced to play, the performances we give until we forget we are performing. And I wonder, was Anne ever truly free? Or did she simply exchange one kind of captivity for another? Epilogue. The confession completed. I am old now. My hands shake when I write, and my eyes grow tired more quickly than they once did. I have seen much in my years as a physician, births and deaths, miracles and tragedies, faith and deception woven so closely together that I can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. I think often about Anne Birch, who became Anne Corley, who became a widow, and then simply Anne again. I think about the choice I made to help her, and the price we both paid for that choice. I think about Father Moore and his careful questions, Father Ashcombe and his troubled doubt, the villagers who believed because they needed to believe. And I think about all the other women I have seen over the years, women who fell into fits or claimed to hear voices or spoke in tongues. And I wonder how many of them were truly claimed by something unseen, and how many were simply claiming it for themselves, because there was no other way to be heard. I do not know the answer. I have never known the answer. But I know this: the line between madness and sanity, between faith and deception, between possession and performance, is thinner than we like to believe. We are all in our way performing. We are all wearing masks. We are all pretending to be something we are not, because the alternative is to face a world that offers us no good choices. Was Anne possessed? No. I can say that with certainty. There was no demon inside her, no shadow dwelling where it should not dwell. But was she lying? That is harder to answer. Because in the end, I think she believed in her own performance so completely that it became real. The fear became genuine. The suffering became genuine. The possession became genuine, not because a spirit entered her, but because she entered the spirit. She became the thing she was pretending to be, until there was no difference between the mask and the face beneath. And perhaps that is what possession truly is. Not an invasion from outside, but a surrender from within. Not a demon that enters, but a self that exits, leaving behind only the performance. I do not know if God exists. I do not know if demons exist. But I know that belief exists, and fear exists, and desperation exists, and sometimes they are enough to create something that looks very much like the sacred or the profane. I write this confession not to condemn Anne or to excuse myself, but to record what I saw and what I did and what I failed to understand until it was too late. I write it so that someone someday might read it and think twice before deciding that they know the difference between truth and deception, between the real and the performed. Because in the end, we are all performing. We are all claimed by something, by duty or fear or faith or desperation. We are all possessed by the roles we are forced to play. And sometimes the only way to be free is to pretend to be something else entirely, even if that pretense destroys us. This is my confession. This is what I witnessed in the winter of 1649 and the years that followed. This is the truth as I know it, which is to say, it is not truth at all, but only one man's memory of events that may have meant something different to everyone else who lived through them. Make of it what you will, but know this: if you ever meet a woman who claims to be possessed, who speaks in tongues and convulses and shows all the signs of something unseen dwelling within her, ask yourself first what choices she has been given. Ask yourself what she is trying to escape. Ask yourself whether you would do any differently if you had walked in her shoes. And then, perhaps, you will understand why I helped Anne Birch, and why I would do it again, even knowing how it ended. Even knowing that in trying to save her, I may have condemned her to something worse than what she feared. Even knowing that there are no good choices, only choices we make and live with and carry until our own time ceases and the silence takes us. This is my confession. I am Martin Greaves, physician, aged 63 years, and I have witnessed both the sacred and the profane, and I can no longer tell which is which. May God forgive me, if there is a God. May Anne forgive me, wherever she is. May I forgive myself, though I doubt I ever will. Written this 20th day of November, in the year of our Lord 1683, by my own hand, in witness of the truth as I understand it. A note, found among the papers of Dr. Martin Greaves, discovered after his death in 1684. They found her in the river, they said. Anne Corley, widow, drowned on a quiet morning in May, her body caught among the reeds near the mill where her father once worked. An accident, they said. She must have slipped on the muddy bank while fetching water, but I heard different. I heard she walked into the water deliberately, dressed in her finest gown, and let it carry her away. I heard she was smiling. I do not know which story is true. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps it does not matter. All I know is that Anne Birch spent her whole life trying to be free, and in the end, perhaps she found it. Not in madness, not in marriage, not in widowhood, but in the water that took her gently and gave her the silence she had always wanted. I hope she is at peace. I hope she found what she was looking for, and I hope that when my own time ceases, someone will say the same of me. MG.